A veteran Navy SEAL thought he was just passing through a quiet forest, looking for nothing but a place to rest. But his dog suddenly stopped, completely still, staring into the trees like it sensed something hidden. No sound, no movement, just a feeling that something wasn't right. The deeper they went, the forest grew unnaturally silent, as if it was hiding something beneath its calm surface. And then, without warning, the trees opened, revealing something impossible. A massive submarine, buried deep in the forest, like it had been erased from the world. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. Silas Creed had stopped looking for anything a long time ago. At 43, he no longer carried the restless hunger that had once driven him through missions, through borders, through nights where sleep came in fragments and never stayed long enough to feel real. What remained instead was something quieter, heavier, like a stone placed gently but permanently inside his chest. He didn't call it regret. He didn't call it loss. He simply carried it, the way a man carries a scar he no longer tries to explain. So he moved. From state to state, forest to forest, always north when the seasons allowed it, places where the air was thinner, cleaner, places where the world felt less crowded with voices and expectations, places where silence wasn't something to fear. Beside him, always, was Rook. The German Shepherd moved with a controlled precision that set him apart from any ordinary dog. At 5, maybe 6 years old, he was in his prime, lean muscle beneath a short, dense black and tan coat, every movement deliberate, efficient. His ears were alert, but never twitchy. His amber-brown eyes constantly reading the world in ways Silas had learned to trust more than his own instincts. Rook did not bark without reason. He did not react without purpose. And when he stopped, really stopped, it meant something. They had reached the main forest just before the light shifted toward early autumn. The trees stood tall and patient, trunks straight as pillars, their crowns filtering sunlight into soft gold that drifted across the forest floor. Pine needles muted their footsteps. The air smelled of resin, damp earth, and something faintly sweet, like decay softened by time. It should have felt peaceful, too peaceful. Silas noticed it the moment he set down his pack. There were no broken branches from recent animal movement, no distant calls echoing between the trees. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before passing through. It wasn't silence in the natural sense. It was something arranged, like a room that had been cleaned too carefully, every object placed just so. He told himself he was imagining it. That happened sometimes. Old habits, old training, the part of his mind that refused to fully shut off, even years after leaving the teams. He had spent too long learning how to read danger in absence, in what wasn't there as much as what was. Just a forest, he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to the dog. Rook didn't look at him. The dog stood about 10 yards ahead, body rigid, head slightly lowered, eyes fixed on a direction Silas hadn't even considered. There was no growl, no bark, no sign of aggression. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that wasn't passive. Silas exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as if he could physically shake off the tension building in his spine. "We'll set camp first," he said quietly. "Whatever it is, it'll still be there in the morning." Rook didn't move. It took a second command, softer but firmer, for the dog to finally turn away and return to him. Even then, the movement was reluctant, as if part of him remained anchored to that unseen point in the forest. They made camp near a narrow stream that cut through the trees like a silver thread. The water was cold enough to sting the skin, clear enough to see smooth stones resting beneath its surface. Silas set up his tent with practiced efficiency, every motion economical, no wasted energy. Routine helped. Routine made things predictable, and predictability, in his world, had always been the closest thing to safety. Rook lay near the edge of the clearing, head up, not resting, watching. Silas noticed it, but said nothing. He had learned early on that forcing Rook to ignore his instincts was a mistake. The dog didn't react to ghosts or shadows. When something caught his attention, it was real, whether visible or not. Night came gradually, the light fading in layers until the forest became a quiet mass of shapes and outlines. Silas sat by a small fire, its glow steady but controlled, the kind of flame that warmed without announcing itself to the world. He ate without much thought, the simple act more about function than pleasure. Across from him, Rook didn't touch his food. That, more than anything, unsettled him. "You're not eating?" Silas asked, voice low. Rook's ears flicked slightly, but his gaze remained fixed on the darkness beyond the trees. Silas followed the line of that gaze. There was nothing there. No movement, no sound, just forest. And yet, the longer he looked, the more he felt it. That same subtle wrongness pressing against the edges of his awareness. Not danger, not yet. Something else, something waiting. He didn't sleep well. Not because of noise, but because of the lack of it. Every time he drifted off, his mind seemed to snap back awake, as if refusing to let him fully disconnect. Years of training had wired him to respond to the smallest shift in environment, and here, there was no shift at all. It was constant, unchanging. That was worse. Sometime before dawn, he gave up trying to sleep and stepped out of the tent. The air had turned colder, carrying a thin layer of mist that hovered just above the ground. The trees loomed taller in the half-light, their outlines blurred, almost unreal. Rook was already awake, standing, facing the same direction as the day before. Silas rubbed a hand over his face, the roughness of his stubble grounding him for a moment. "You're really not letting this go, are you?" No response. Just that fixed stare. Silas hesitated. Then he nodded once, more to himself than to the dog. "All right," he said quietly. "You lead." They moved through the forest without a trail. Rook went first, navigating with confidence, weaving between trees, stepping over roots and fallen branches as if he had already memorized the terrain. Silas followed, his longer stride adjusted to match the dog's pace, boots pressing softly into the pine-covered ground. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to change. Not visibly, not in any way he could easily define, but in feeling. The air grew heavier, the light dimmer even as the sun rose higher. The sounds of distant wildlife, faint as they had been before, faded entirely. It felt sealed, as if they had crossed an invisible line. Silas felt it in his chest first, a tightening, subtle but persistent. His senses sharpened, old instincts rising to the surface whether he wanted them to or not. He began noting details automatically. Wind direction, minimal. Ground disturbance, none recent. Scent, earth, pine, and something else. Faint, metallic. He stopped. Rook stopped with him, turning his head slightly as if to confirm Silas had finally noticed. "You smell that?" Silas murmured. The dog's ears flicked once. "Yes." Then, without warning, Rook stepped directly in front of Silas and blocked his path. Not aggressively, not urgently, but firmly. It was a behavior Silas knew well, one Rook had been trained to use only in specific situations. Situations where moving forward without reassessment could mean immediate danger. Silas froze. His pulse slowed instead of quickening, the way it always had when things became serious. "What is it?" he asked under his breath. Rook didn't look at him. He lowered his body slightly, weight shifting forward, eyes locked ahead. Silas followed that gaze, and for the first time, he saw it. Not clearly, not all at once. Just a shape. Something that did not belong. The trees thinned gradually, almost reluctantly, as if revealing what lay beyond was not their intention, but an inevitability. The ground sloped downward, the earth giving way to patches of exposed rock slick with moisture and moss. And then the forest opened, not into a clearing, but into a hollow. A wide, sunken valley, hidden from every angle that mattered. Silas stepped forward slowly, each movement measured, controlled. The mist lingered here longer, clinging to the ground, softening edges, obscuring detail. For a moment, it almost hid what lay at the center. Almost. Then the light shifted, and the shape resolved into something undeniable. Silas stopped. Not out of fear, but out of recognition, of scale, of impossibility, of something his mind tried to categorize and failed. It was a submarine, not small, not partial, a full, massive structure of steel and time, resting on its side like the carcass of a great animal that had wandered too far from the ocean and never found its way back. The hull was streaked with rust, layers of faded paint peeling away to reveal older markings beneath, most of them deliberately removed, scratched out, erased. Around it, barely visible beneath the encroaching forest, were remnants of something else. Concrete slabs, cracked and overtaken by roots, sections of metal rail half buried in earth, fragments of structures that had once supported something larger. This had not been an accident. It had been built here, and then abandoned. Silas felt the old part of himself surface fully now, the part that analyzed, that questioned, that refused to accept things at face value. This wasn't just wrong. It was intentional. Rook did not move. He stood at the edge of the slope, muscles tense but controlled, eyes fixed on the submarine. Not with fear, with awareness. Silas took a slow breath. The metallic scent stronger here, mixing with damp earth and something faintly chemical. "This wasn't supposed to be found," he said quietly. The words felt right. Not a guess, a conclusion. Rook shifted slightly, but still did not approach. That was what unsettled Silas the most. The dog, who would walk into danger without hesitation, refused to take another step. Silas looked at the submarine again, at the silent weight of it resting in the hollow, at the way the forest seemed to hold its breath around it. And for the first time since arriving in Maine, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not curiosity, not caution, something deeper. A sense that this place, this thing, was not just part of the landscape. It was a wound, and whatever had caused it wasn't finished. Silas did not go down into the valley right away. He stayed at the edge longer than he needed to, studying the submarine from a distance, letting his eyes adjust not just to the scale of it, but to the wrongness of it. Up close would come later. For now, distance gave him perspective, and perspective kept him alive. Rook stood beside him, silent, unmoving. The morning light had strengthened, pushing through the thinning mist and revealing more of the structure below. What at first seemed like a single massive hull now showed detail. Layers of steel plates, seams of welding, access hatches that had been sealed and resealed over time. Some sections carried faint traces of paint, dulled by decades of weather. Others exposed raw metal eaten by rust. This was not wreckage. This was abandonment. Silas crouched slightly, resting his forearms on his knees as he narrowed his gaze. "You don't leave something like this behind, unless you have a reason," he murmured, more to himself than to Rook. The dog's ears shifted once, but his attention remained fixed. Silas scanned the perimeter again. That was when he saw it. Not the submarine, the ground around it. There were patterns, subtle, almost erased, but still there. Straight lines cutting through the uneven terrain. Rectangular outlines beneath the moss and soil. He stepped a little closer, eyes tracing what time had tried to bury. Concrete? Cracked, sunken, overtaken by roots, but unmistakably man-made. Further out, barely visible beneath layers of dirt and creeping vegetation, were sections of old rail, short, disconnected. But enough. Silas exhaled slowly. "Not transported," he said under his breath. "Built here." The words settled into him with a weight he didn't immediately like, because that meant planning, infrastructure, people. And if something this large had been built here once, then a lot more had existed around it. A lot more had been removed. Rook moved first, not forward, sideways. The shift was small but deliberate, pulling Silas's attention toward a section of the hull that had collapsed slightly inward. A fracture line ran along the side, jagged but stable enough to hold. "All right," Silas said quietly. "We check it. Slow." He descended carefully, boots finding stable ground among loose stones and damp earth. The air changed as he moved lower, cooler, heavier, carrying that same faint metallic tang he had noticed earlier, now sharper, almost bitter at the back of his throat. Rook stayed just ahead of him, but not by much. Close enough to respond, far enough to lead. When they reached the hull, Silas placed a hand against the metal. Cold. Not just from the morning air, it felt preserved in a way that didn't match the decay around it. He moved along the surface, fingers brushing over layers of worn paint until he found what he was looking for. Scratches. Not random damage, intentional. Markings had been removed. Numbers, symbols, identity. Someone had made sure this thing would not be traced easily. Silas leaned in closer to the fracture line. The opening wasn't large, but it was enough. Inside, darkness swallowed the light almost immediately, the interior air thick and stale, carrying the scent of old oil, rust, and something else. Something chemical that didn't belong to age alone. Rook stopped. He did not step inside. That was all Silas needed to know. He didn't enter either. Instead, he crouched near the edge of the opening, scanning the ground. That was where he found it. Half buried beneath a thin layer of dirt and moss, caught between two jagged pieces of metal. A small, rectangular object. He brushed it free. Turned it over in his hand. A nameplate. Weathered, edges corroded, but still readable. N. Wren. Silas stared at it for a moment longer than necessary, not because the name meant anything to him yet, but because of where it had been found. Not inside, not hidden, dropped, as if it had been lost or removed in a hurry. Rook let out a low breath, not quite a growl, not quite a warning. Silas's head lifted immediately. He turned, and that was when he saw him. At the far edge of the valley, partially obscured by the tree line, stood a man. Not close, not approaching, just there, watching. Silas didn't move at first. He simply shifted his weight slightly, adjusting his stance. angling his body just enough to reduce his profile while keeping his eyes locked on the figure. The man didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't wave. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, but carrying it differently than Silas. Not trained, not refined. His posture had a roughness to it, like someone used to moving through uneven ground without thinking about it. His beard was thick, uneven, covering most of his lower face, streaked with gray. His hair was hidden beneath a worn cap, pulled low. Even at that distance, Silas could see the way the man stood, balanced, ready, but not aggressive. A hunter, not a soldier. Rook stepped forward suddenly, not toward the man, toward the space between them, and then, unexpectedly, he sat, still, alert, watching. It wasn't a defensive posture. It wasn't a signal to attack. It was acknowledgement. As if, in that quiet space between two strangers, the dog had recognized something neither man had yet spoken aloud. Silas felt a subtle shift in his chest. Not relief, not tension, something else. Recognition. The man finally moved. Not forward, but back. One step, then another, and then he turned, disappearing into the trees without a word. Silas remained where he was for several seconds after the man was gone, eyes still fixed on the place where he had stood. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We're not alone out here." Rook stood again, returning to Silas's side. But the stillness had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. Now it was watched. They didn't stay long after that. Silas made the decision quickly, without hesitation. He took one last look at the submarine, at the fractured hull and the silent weight of it resting in the hollow, then slipped the nameplate into his jacket pocket. "Come on," he said. Rook followed immediately this time. No hesitation, no resistance. That, more than anything, told Silas the right call had been made. The walk back felt different. The forest no longer felt untouched. Now it felt observed. Silas kept his pace steady, but his awareness sharpened. Every shift in light, every movement of shadow, every faint sound carried more meaning than before. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Rook mirrored him perfectly, moving just ahead, occasionally glancing back. Not uncertain, but checking. By the time they reached the edge of the camp, the sun had climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist. Everything looked normal again. Too normal. Silas stopped just before stepping fully into the clearing. Something was off. Not dramatically, not violently, just slightly. He scanned the area, the tent, the fire pit, his pack, all where they should be. But something felt disturbed. Rook moved first. He approached the pack, lowered his head, and inhaled slowly. Then he looked up at Silas. That was enough. Silas stepped forward and knelt beside the bag, unzipping it with controlled precision. He checked the contents quickly. Nothing missing. Not his knife, not his gear, not the essentials. But that wasn't the point. Someone had been here. Careful enough not to take anything. Careful enough to leave no obvious trace. But not careful enough to avoid the one thing they couldn't hide from. Scent. Rook stepped back slightly, ears angled, body still. Silas closed the bag and stood. "Same guy," he said quietly. He didn't need confirmation. He already knew. They broke camp faster than usual, not rushed, but efficient. Silas packed everything with deliberate care, each item returned to its place, every movement controlled. Routine again. Routine kept things clear. But this time it wasn't about comfort. It was about readiness. When he finally slung the pack over his shoulder, he paused for a moment, looking out into the trees. The forest looked the same. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Now it had a name, not the forest, the story inside it. Silas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the metal plate again. N. Wren. He turned it over in his hand, thumb brushing over the worn surface. A name didn't belong in a place like this by accident. Names meant people. People meant stories. And stories didn't stay buried forever. Rook shifted beside him, gaze drifting once more toward the direction of the valley. Not urgent, not tense, just aware. Silas followed that gaze for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "We'll come back." But not yet. Not without knowing more. They left the clearing without looking back. But the feeling stayed. Not fear, not curiosity. Something deeper. A sense that whatever had been left behind in that valley had not been left alone. Briar's End looked like the kind of place people imagined when they talked about peace. The road into town curved gently through rows of tall pines before opening into a small valley where wooden houses stood evenly spaced, their paint worn but maintained. There were flower boxes under windows, wind chimes hanging from porches, and a general store that still used a hand-painted sign instead of anything modern. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and fresh-cut lumber, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang once, slow and steady. It was beautiful. And that was the problem. Places like this didn't stay untouched by accident. Not in a world that had already scraped away so much of its quiet corners. Briar's End wasn't preserved. It was protected. Silas parked his old truck near the edge of town, engine ticking softly as it cooled. He sat there for a moment, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, eyes scanning the street. People noticed them. Not openly, not rudely, but enough. A man stepping out of the store paused half a second too long. A woman watering flowers slowed her movements. Two older men sitting on a bench stopped their conversation just as Silas's door opened. He had seen that look before. Not curiosity, awareness. Rook stepped out beside him, landing quietly on the gravel, his posture immediately alert but not aggressive. His coat caught the sunlight, the black and tan blending into something almost golden in motion. His eyes moved constantly, reading the space in ways no human could replicate. "Easy," Silas murmured. The dog stayed close, not anxious, not tense, just ready. They found Jonah Pike at the far end of town, sitting outside a small hardware store that looked older than everything else around it. The wood of the building had darkened over time, worn smooth by decades of weather and use. A faded sign hung above the door, barely readable. Jonah Pike matched the place. He was in his early 70s, tall even with the slight bend in his back, his frame still carrying the weight of someone who had once been strong in a way that mattered. His face was lined deeply, not just by age, but by years of holding things in. His eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, had the distant look of a man who had seen more than he ever intended to remember. He wore a worn brown canvas jacket over a red flannel shirt, the fabric softened from years of use. His hands, large and rough, rested on a wooden cane he didn't fully need, but didn't go anywhere without. When Silas approached, Jonah didn't greet him. He just watched. "You Jonah Pike?" Silas asked. Jonah didn't answer right away. His gaze moved from Silas to Rook, lingering there a fraction longer than expected. "Used to be," he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. "Now I just sit here." Silas nodded slightly, accepting that. "I've got a question." Jonah's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. That's usually how it starts. Silas reached into his jacket and pulled out the nameplate. He didn't hand it over, just held it where Jonah could see. For a moment, nothing happened. Then something shifted, not outwardly, but inside. Jonah's grip tightened on the cane just enough to notice. "Where'd you find that?" he asked, voice quieter now. "In the forest," Silas replied. "North Ridge." That was all it took. Jonah exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried more weight than air alone. "I was hoping," he said, almost to himself, "that thing would stay buried." At first, he refused to say more. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting past Silas as if looking at something that no longer existed. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Silas didn't push. He had learned long ago that people like Jonah didn't respond to pressure. They responded to time. Rook moved instead. The dog stepped forward, slow and deliberate, stopping a few feet in front of Jonah. He didn't bark, didn't lower his head, didn't wag his tail. He simply stood and looked. There was no aggression in that gaze, no demand, just presence. Jonah's eyes dropped to meet his. For a moment, the old man didn't breathe. Then his shoulders sagged, the tension draining out of him like something finally giving way after years of holding firm. "Damn dog," he muttered under his breath. Jonah leaned forward slightly, resting both hands on his cane. "That forest," he began, voice steady but heavy, "wasn't always just trees." Silas said nothing. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a facility up there, government project. Nobody knew exactly what it was, not officially. But trucks came in at night, equipment, materials, men who didn't stay long. Jonah's gaze drifted again, not unfocused, just far away. "I was deputy back then," he continued. "Didn't have clearance, but we knew enough. Enough to know we weren't supposed to ask." Silas shifted his weight slightly. "What happened?" Jonah's jaw tightened. "There was an incident," he said. "Something went wrong. We never got the full story, but we heard things. Explosions, containment failure, people not making it out." He paused, fingers tightening again around the cane. "And then one day, it was over. Trucks came back, not bringing things in this time, taking them out. Equipment, files, anything that could be moved." Silas's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what couldn't?" Jonah looked at him directly now. "They left it," he said. Jonah's voice lowered, almost a whisper. "But here's the part nobody talks about," he said. "After they shut it down, after everything was supposed to be gone." He paused, then added quietly, "People kept seeing lights up there." Silas didn't react outwardly, but something inside him shifted. "Not every night," Jonah continued. "Not even often. Just enough. Enough to make folks uneasy. Enough that eventually people stopped going near that part of the forest altogether." Rook's ears lifted slightly, not in alarm, recognition. Jonah leaned back again, the moment passing, but not entirely. "The town was given a choice," he said after a while. "Keep quiet or lose everything, funding, jobs, infrastructure. We were small, still are. Didn't take much to tip the scales." "So you stayed quiet," Silas said. Jonah didn't flinch. "We survived," he replied. There was no pride in his voice, only fact. Silas tucked the nameplate back into his pocket. And Wren? He asked. That name landed differently. Jonah hesitated, then shook his head slightly. That one? You'd have to ask someone else. Who? Jonah glanced toward the far end of the street. There's a ranger station about a mile south, he said. Elena Wren. That name might mean something to her. They found her just as the afternoon light began to soften. The ranger station was small but well kept, sitting at the edge of the forest where the road narrowed into dirt. A truck was parked out front, covered lightly in dust, and a stack of firewood sat neatly beside the door. Elena Wren stepped out before they even reached the porch. She moved like someone used to navigating uneven ground, balanced, efficient, aware. She stood about 5'8", her build lean and strong, shaped by years of working outdoors rather than any structured training. Her brown hair was pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her face, catching the light. Her skin carried a natural tan, not from leisure but from exposure, and her eyes, green with hints of gray, were sharp, observant. She looked at Silas first, then at Rook, then back at Silas. You're not from around here, she said. Not a question. No, Silas replied. Her gaze didn't soften. What do you want? Silas reached into his pocket again. This time, he handed over the nameplate. She took it without hesitation. And for a moment, she stopped breathing. It was subtle, but undeniable. Her fingers tightened around the metal, her eyes scanning the worn letters as if they might change if she looked long enough. Nathaniel Wren, she said quietly. Not asking, remembering. Silas watched her carefully. You know him? Elena didn't look up right away. When she did, something had shifted. My father, she said. Silas didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence that followed carried enough weight for both of them. He didn't disappear, Elena said after a moment, her voice steady but edged with something deeper. That's what people say. That he left. Walked out. Her jaw tightened slightly. But he didn't. Silas studied her expression. You believe that, he said. Elena met his gaze. I know that, she replied. That night, back at camp, the forest felt different again. Not empty, not quiet, aware. Silas sat by the fire, staring into the low flames, the nameplate resting in his hand once more. Across from him, Rook lay still, not sleeping, watching, always watching. But this time, his gaze wasn't just toward the forest. It shifted occasionally, toward Silas, as if waiting, as if knowing that something had already begun. And whatever it wasn't going to stop. They returned to the valley just after sunrise. This time, there was no hesitation. Silas Creed moved with quiet certainty, his posture steady, every step placed with intention. The olive field jacket brushed softly against his sides as he descended the slope, the worn leather of his boots gripping damp earth and loose stone. His face, sharp and weathered, carried the same controlled calm it always did. But his eyes had changed. There was focus now, sharper than before, anchored not just in curiosity, but in responsibility. Elena Wren followed a few steps behind him. Up close, she looked different than she had at the ranger station. Less guarded, but not softer, more exposed. Her green-gray eyes moved constantly across the valley, not in fear, but in recognition. This place meant something to her now, even if she couldn't yet name it fully. Her ranger jacket was zipped higher than before, hands tucked briefly into the pockets as if bracing against something colder than the morning air. Rook walked ahead of both of them. The German shepherd's body remained low and controlled, his muscles coiled beneath his short, dense coat. His ears were forward, not rigid, but alert, catching things neither human could detect. Every few steps, he paused, not to rest, but to listen. The valley no longer felt like a discovery. It felt like an answer, waiting to be understood. They reached the submarine in silence. Up close, the structure loomed larger than memory had allowed. The hull's curvature seemed unnatural against the uneven terrain, as if it resisted belonging even after all these years. Rust streaked downward like old wounds, but beneath it, the metal still held shape, still held strength. Silas moved along the same fracture line they had seen before, crouching slightly as he examined the opening again. "We don't go deep," he said quietly, his voice firm but calm. "We observe. We don't explore." Elena nodded, but she didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the opening. "Whatever he left behind," she said softly, almost to herself. "He wanted it found." Silas didn't answer, because he wasn't sure if that was true. Inside, the air changed immediately. The temperature dropped, not drastically, but enough to notice. The smell was stronger here. Oxidized metal, old oil, and something chemical that lingered just beneath the surface, faint but persistent. The light didn't reach far. Silas switched on a small flashlight, the beam cutting through dust particles that floated slowly in the stale air. The interior of the submarine felt less like a machine and more like a ruin. A place abandoned not just physically, but intentionally. The narrow corridor sloped slightly, the floor uneven underfoot. Rook stopped. Not abruptly, but deliberately. He turned his head toward the right, ears twitching once, then moved in that direction without waiting. Silas followed. Elena hesitated, just for a moment, then stepped after them. The compartment Rook led them to was smaller, lower. The ceiling dipped just enough to force them to bend slightly as they entered. The walls were lined with panels, some intact, others torn open, wires hanging like exposed veins. The floor, however, was the problem. It wasn't solid. Sections of it had rotted through, leaving gaps where darkness swallowed the beam of the flashlight completely. Silas raised a hand slightly. "Careful," he said. Elena stepped forward, and the floor gave way beneath her foot. It happened in less than a second. Her body dropped, a sharp intake of breath, and then Rook moved. Not fast in the way humans understood speed, but precisely. His body launched forward, jaws catching the fabric of her jacket just as she fell through the broken section. The force jerked him forward, claws scraping against the metal floor. But he held. Silas grabbed her arm immediately, pulling her back up. For a moment, no one spoke. Elena sat on the floor, breathing hard, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at the gap beneath where she had stood, dark, endless. If she had fallen, she wouldn't have come back up. Rook stepped back slowly, releasing her jacket. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at Silas. He looked at the floor, at the place where it had broken, as if marking it, as if remembering it. Silas rested a hand briefly on the dog's back, firm and quiet. "Good boy," he said. Rook didn't react. He never did. They moved slower after that, more deliberate, more aware. The compartment extended further than expected, ending in what appeared to be a storage section. Metal cabinets lined one wall, most of them rusted shut, others hanging open with nothing inside. But one area stood out. A section of the wall had been partially cleared, not recently, but intentionally. Silas crouched, brushing aside debris until he uncovered a small, rectangular metal box, wedged tightly into the corner. It was sealed, not locked, but closed with care. He looked at Elena once. She nodded. He opened it. Inside were pieces of a life, photographs, paper, and something else. A small, worn recording device. Elena picked up one of the photographs first. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was not. The image showed a man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, tired but composed, standing beside a group of others in front of the same structure they now stood inside. His face carried a resemblance that didn't need explanation. Nathaniel Wren. Younger, but the same eyes. Silas lifted the recorder, turned it in his hand. "It still might work," he said. Elena didn't answer. She was still staring at the photograph. He pressed the button. At first, nothing. Just static, a low, uneven hum. Then, a voice. It came through rough, distorted by time, but unmistakably human. Steady, controlled, but not calm. "This is log entry. I've lost track of the date." The voice paused, then continued. "We were told it was contained, that it wouldn't spread, that the levels were acceptable." A breath. Not long, but heavier than the words around it. That was a lie. Silas didn't move. Elena didn't breathe. The recording continued. "They're burying it," the voice said, "not removing it, not neutralizing it, just sealing it and calling it done." A faint sound in the background. Metal, distant movement. "They don't understand what it will do. The water system runs below this entire ridge. It won't stay here." Another pause, longer this time. And when the voice returned, it was different. Still controlled, but something had broken through. Elena. The name didn't come out clean. It came out like something being held together by force. "If you ever hear this..." Silas felt something tighten in his chest. "I need you to know," the voice faltered, for the first time. "I didn't leave you." The recording cut to static. No ending, no resolution. Just silence. Elena didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She didn't speak. She just sat there. Still. The photograph still in her hand. Her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the submarine, beyond the years that had separated her from that voice. Silas watched her. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer comfort. Some moments didn't need words. They needed space. Rook shifted slightly beside them. Not restless, not alert, just present. He moved closer to Elaine and sat down beside her. Not touching, not leaning, just there. A quiet weight, a steady presence. After a long time, Elena inhaled slowly. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Too calm. "He stayed," she said. Silas nodded once. "Yes." She looked down at the recorder again. "They made it look like he left," she continued. "That he chose not to come back." Her grip tightened slightly around the photograph. "They buried him the same way they buried all of this." Silas didn't respond, because she was right. He stood slowly, scanning the compartment one more time. The files, the box, the broken floor, the silence. "This wasn't meant to be found easily," he said, "but it wasn't meant to disappear either." Elena looked up at him. "What do you mean?" Silas met her gaze. "He left it where someone could reach it," he said. "Eventually. They didn't take everything, just what mattered. The recorder, the photograph, a few pages of documents. Enough. Not too much. Silas knew better than to disturb a place like this more than necessary. When they stepped back outside, the sunlight felt different. Brighter, but not warmer. The valley hadn't changed. The submarine still sat where it had always been. Silent, unmoving. But now it wasn't just a mystery. It was evidence. Rook stopped at the edge of the slope. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. He just stood there, watching the tree line, as if he knew something else was out there, something that had not yet shown itself. Silas adjusted the strap of his pack. "Elena," he said quietly. She turned. He held up the recorder slightly. "This changes things." She nodded. "Yes." They left the valley together, but not the same as they had entered, because now they weren't just following a trail. They were carrying the truth of it, and the truth never stayed buried for long. They didn't return to town immediately. Silas led them away from the valley first, choosing distance over reaction, the same way he had done in situations where information came faster than decisions. The forest stretched around them again, tall and quiet. But it no longer felt untouched. It felt layered, like something had been hidden beneath it for too long, and now, piece by piece, it was surfacing. Elena walked beside him, not speaking. The recorder was in her jacket pocket, but she held it there as if it might disappear if she let go. Her posture had changed since they left the submarine. It wasn't grief. Not yet. It was something more controlled, more contained. The kind of stillness that came before a storm inside someone. Rook stayed slightly ahead, moving slower than before, his head lower, nose closer to the ground. Every few steps, he paused, testing the air, then continuing. Silas noticed. He always noticed. "You picking something up?" he asked quietly. Rook didn't look back, but his pace shifted. That was enough. They reached the edge of the forest just as the light began to turn softer, the afternoon fading toward evening. The truck was where they had left it, untouched. But Silas still circled it once, eyes scanning, senses checking. Nothing obvious, which meant nothing certain. He opened the door without hesitation. "Town," he said. Elena nodded. Briar's End felt different this time. Not quieter, not louder, but aware. People still moved the same way, still spoke in low voices, still carried on with routines that looked ordinary. But now, Silas could see the tension beneath it. The glances lasted longer. The pauses were sharper. They weren't being watched. They were being measured. They found him before they found anything else. Gideon Bale stood near the center of town, just outside the general store, as if he had always intended to be seen. He didn't approach them. He didn't signal. He simply waited, his posture composed, hands loosely at his sides. He was a man who carried control the way others carried weight, effortlessly, but never accidentally. Tall, lean, and precisely dressed, even in a place like this. His charcoal coat fell cleanly along his frame, the fabric too refined for the setting, his boots polished in a way that suggested he never walked through anything he didn't choose to. His face was sharp, defined by clean lines and careful grooming. Dark hair brushed back with just enough gray at the temples to suggest age, not decline. But it was his eyes that held attention. Not cold, not cruel, just decided. Silas stepped toward him. Rook stayed close. Elena slowed slightly behind. Gideon spoke first. "You went up there," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. Not a question. Silas didn't answer immediately. He studied the man instead. "Depends what there is," he replied. Gideon's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "I think we both know that answer." There was no threat in his tone, no aggression. That made it worse. "Some things," Gideon continued, glancing briefly toward the forest, "are left alone for a reason." Silas crossed his arms loosely, the movement casual but deliberate. "And some things are buried for the wrong ones." That landed, not visibly, but Gideon registered it. "Elena," Gideon said, shifting his gaze to her. She stiffened slightly. He noticed. "Your father was a good man," he said. The words were measured, careful, as if chosen long before this moment. Elena stepped forward now, her voice steady but edged with something sharp. "You knew him?" Gideon held her gaze. "Indirectly," he said. "I know what happened to him." Silas watched both of them closely. The space between truth and manipulation was thin, and Gideon stood comfortably in it. "My family," Gideon said after a pause, his voice lowering slightly, "was destroyed by something very similar." That shifted the air. Not dramatically, but enough. Silas didn't interrupt. He let it come. "My father worked for a company that mishandled waste," Gideon continued. "It came out. The truth, public, immediate, uncontrolled." His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Within a year," he said, "we lost everything. Not just money, reputation, stability. My mother." He paused briefly, then continued, "Didn't survive it." Elena didn't respond. Silas didn't either, because this wasn't justification. This was explanation. Gideon looked directly at Silas now. "Do you know what I learned from that?" he asked quietly. Silas met his gaze. "That truth," Gideon said, "doesn't fix anything." A slight pause. "Sometimes it just breaks what little is left." Rook shifted beside Silas, not forward, not defensive, but his eyes fixed on Gideon now, unblinking, steady, as if trying to read something deeper than the words being spoken. For a brief moment, Gideon's gaze flickered. Not fear, not uncertainty, something else. Recognition. "There are consequences," Gideon continued, his voice returning to its earlier calm, "to bringing things like that to the surface. This town survives because certain things were allowed to stay buried." Silas tilted his head slightly. "Allowed by who?" Gideon didn't answer that. Not directly. "Ask yourself this," he said instead. "What happens to a place like this when everything holding it together is suddenly taken away?" Elena stepped forward again. "This place is already built on a lie," she said. Gideon looked at her, not dismissively, but carefully. "And yet," he replied, "you're still standing here, alive, safe." That landed harder, because it wasn't entirely wrong. Silas exhaled slowly. He had heard versions of this before, different places, different voices, same argument, control over chaos, silence over damage. He glanced at Rook briefly. The dog hadn't moved, but his attention hadn't wavered. "Think about it," Gideon said, stepping back slightly now, "before you decide what to do next." He turned without waiting for a response and walked away. No urgency, no hesitation, like a man who trusted that what he had said would linger longer than his presence. They didn't speak right away. They stood there, in the middle of the town, surrounded by people who pretended not to notice them. Finally, Elena exhaled. "He's wrong," she said. But her voice lacked conviction. Silas didn't respond immediately, because he understood something she didn't want to admit yet. Gideon wasn't entirely wrong. They found Martha Wren just before dusk. Her house sat at the edge of town, modest, well-kept, but quiet in a way that felt different from the rest. The porch light was already on, casting a soft glow against the fading light. Martha opened the door before they knocked. She was smaller than Elena, thinner, her shoulders slightly rounded, as if shaped by years of carrying something unseen. Her hair, once dark, had faded into a soft gray, cut short and practical. Her eyes, pale blue, held a gentleness that didn't hide the weight behind them. She looked at Silas briefly, then at Rook, and then at Elena. She knew. Before a word was spoken. "He didn't leave," Elena said. No hesitation, no build-up, just truth. Martha closed her eyes, not in denial, in surrender. "I know," she whispered. They sat inside. The house was warm, simple, filled with small details that suggested a life lived quietly. Photographs lined the walls, some turned slightly, others left untouched, all part of a history that had been carefully managed. Martha folded her hands in her lap. "They came to me," she said after a long silence. "After it happened?" Silas leaned slightly forward. "Who?" She shook her head faintly. "People who didn't need names." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with memory. "They told me, if I asked questions, if I spoke, it wouldn't just be me who suffered." Her eyes moved to Elena. "They said you would pay for it." Elena's breath caught slightly. Martha reached for her hand. "I didn't choose silence because I was weak," she said softly. "I chose it because I was afraid of losing the only thing I had left." Elena didn't pull away, but she didn't respond either. Silas leaned back slightly, the weight of the room settling around him. He had heard this before. Different faces, different stories, same choice, same cost. And then he remembered, not clearly, not all at once, but enough. A mission, years ago, information buried, orders followed. A man who had trusted them, who had trusted him, and didn't make it out. Because the truth had been delayed, just long enough. Silas looked down at his hands, then at Rook. The dog was watching him now. Not the room, not the others. Him, as if waiting. Outside, the light had almost disappeared. The forest stood at the edge of the town, silent, patient. And somewhere beyond it, the valley remained, unchanged. Back near the submarine, beneath layers of dirt and time, Rook had begun to dig earlier that day, not randomly, not instinctively, but with purpose. And no one yet understood why. They returned before first light, not because it was safer, but because it felt necessary. The forest at dawn held a different kind of silence, less empty, more watchful. A thin mist hung low across the ground, softening the edges of trees and stone, turning the familiar into something distant and uncertain. The air carried a sharper bite now, and beneath it, that same faint metallic trace lingered, just enough to be noticed if you knew what to look for. Silas Creed moved steadily through the trees, his posture upright but controlled, every step placed with quiet precision. The olive field jacket rested naturally on his frame, worn into him like a second skin, while his eyes scanned constantly, not searching for danger, but anticipating it. Elena followed close behind, She didn't speak, not because she had nothing to say, but because whatever she felt had not yet settled into words. The recorder was still with her, tucked safely inside her jacket. But now it felt less like evidence and more like something fragile, something that could break again if handled the wrong way. Rook led. The German shepherd's body moved lower than usual, his head dipping closer to the ground, nose working continuously. His steps were slower, more deliberate, as if he were following something that didn't leave visible tracks. Silas noticed immediately. "You've got something," he said quietly. Rook didn't look back, but he changed direction. They didn't go directly to the submarine this time. Instead, Rook veered behind it, toward a section of ground that looked no different from the rest. Uneven, covered in pine needles and low brush, roots pushing up through soil that had long since reclaimed anything human-made beneath it. And then he stopped. He lowered his body and began to dig. Not erratically, not instinctively, with intention. Each movement controlled, focused, driven by something deeper than curiosity. Elena frowned slightly, stepping closer. "What is he?" Silas raised a hand. "Let him work." They watched. Minutes passed. The sound of dirt shifting, roots snapping, and breath moving in steady rhythm filled the space between them. Then, a dull, hollow sound. Rook froze, then stepped back. Silas moved forward, kneeling down, brushing away the remaining dirt with his hands. The surface beneath was not stone. It was metal. Flat, cold, deliberate, a panel. He traced the edges with his fingers until he found a seam. A faint line where the earth had settled unevenly over something that was never meant to be exposed again. "Elena," he said quietly. She was already beside him. They cleared more dirt together, slowly, carefully, until the outline became clear. A hatch. It took effort to open, not because it was locked, but because time had pressed it shut. The seal resisted at first, then gave way with a low, dragging sound that echoed strangely in the quiet. A breath of air rose from below, stale, heavy, but contained. Silas waited a moment, letting it dissipate slightly before shining his light downward. A narrow set of steps descended into darkness, not part of the original structure. Added, separate, intentional. They went down, one at a time. Silas first, then Elena. Rook followed last. The space below was smaller than expected. Not a full chamber, more like a hidden compartment. The walls were reinforced, not with heavy steel like the submarine above, but with simpler materials. Treated panels, insulated, designed to hold something stable over time. And at the center were containers. Boxes, metal cases, sealed, labeled. Silas approached the nearest one, opened it. Inside, documents, preserved, organized, untouched by decay. He flipped through the pages quickly. Data logs, environmental readings, coordinates, and then names. A list, typed, clear, complete. Elena stepped closer. "What is that?" she asked. Silas didn't answer immediately. He handed her the page. She read it. Her breath slowed, not in calm, in realization. "These are the people responsible," she said quietly. Rook moved suddenly, not toward the documents, not toward the entrance, but toward the far corner of the chamber. He stopped, stared, and then let out a low, controlled sound, deep in his chest. Not a growl, not a warning, something else. Silas turned. His hand moved instinctively toward his knife. The corner was darker than the rest, but not empty. There, half hidden behind stacked crates, was another container, smaller, different, and unlike the others, it wasn't sealed. Silas approached slowly. Every instinct sharpened. He crouched, opened it fully. Inside was not paper, not data, not records. It was a device, old, but not dead, a monitoring unit. Still connected, still intact. A faint, blinking light pulsed on its surface. Steady, consistent, alive. Elena stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's still running." Silas nodded slowly. "That's not possible," she added. "No," he said quietly. "It's not supposed to be." That was when they heard it. Above, not loud, not close, but unmistakable. Movement. More than one. Silas stood immediately. "All of it," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Take what you can carry." Elena didn't argue. She grabbed the documents, hands moving faster now, not panicked, but aware. Rook moved to the base of the steps, waiting, listening. They climbed out quickly. The forest greeted them again, but it no longer felt quiet. Now it felt active, alive, watching. Silas scanned the tree line. There, movement. 3 figures, not approaching directly, spreading, flanking. "Not good," he muttered. Elena turned. "What do we do?" Silas looked at Rook. The dog was already moving, not away from the danger, but through it, choosing a path. "Stay close," Silas said. And they ran. It wasn't chaos. It was control. Silas moved through the forest with practiced efficiency, adjusting direction based on terrain, using elevation, cover, spacing. Elena followed, trusting his movement more than her own instincts now. Rook stayed ahead, guiding, not randomly, not fleeing, navigating. A branch snapped behind them, closer now. Silas turned briefly, just long enough to see one of the men break through the trees, tall, built, moving fast, too fast. "Keep going," Silas called. The ground shifted underfoot, steeper, uneven. Elena slipped, caught herself, kept moving. Rook changed direction again, sharper this time. Silas followed. And then, pain. It hit without warning, a sharp impact to his side. He hadn't seen it coming, a strike or a projectile, he couldn't tell. His balance broke for a fraction of a second. That was enough. He stumbled, then fell. The world tilted. Sound compressed. Light narrowed. Elena turned. "Silas!" Rook stopped, looked back. And for the first time, he hesitated. Silas tried to push himself up. Failed. The weight in his chest returned. Familiar. Too familiar. His vision blurred slightly. He had been here before, not this place, but this moment, where movement stopped and everything narrowed to a single thought. This is where it ends. He exhaled. Slow, accepting, Rook made a decision, and then he left. Elena froze. "Rook!" But the dog was already gone into the trees, gone away from them. Silas closed his eyes briefly. A bitter thought crossed his mind. Not anger, not betrayal, just understanding. Even loyalty has limits. Time passed. Seconds or minutes, hard to tell. Then, movement. Again. But different. Closer. Controlled. Silas forced his eyes open. Through the blur, he saw them. 2 figures. One he recognized. Jonah Pike. Moving faster than his age should allow, his cane discarded somewhere behind him. His steps uneven but determined. His face was set in a way Silas hadn't seen before. Not distant, not resigned. Decided. Beside him, Rook. The dog reached Silas first. Not frantic, not panicked. He pressed close, grounded, present. Jonah arrived seconds later, breathing hard but steady enough. "Couldn't leave it alone," the old man muttered. Silas let out a breath that almost became a laugh. Almost. And in that moment, he understood. Not everything, but enough. Rook hadn't left. He had gone to get what was needed, not because he was trained, not because he was ordered, but because he knew. The truth did not explode. It did not arrive like thunder or tear through the town in a single moment of reckoning. It spread, slowly, like something seeping through cracks that had been sealed for too long. Daniel Hargrove did not look like a man who believed in victory. When Silas met him for the first time, it was in a small office above a closed bookstore 2 towns over. The place smelled faintly of old paper and stale coffee, and the blinds were half drawn, even in the middle of the day. Hargrove himself was thin, in a way that suggested more neglect than age. His shoulders sloped slightly forward, not from weakness, but from years spent leaning into work that never quite gave anything back. His hair, once dark, had faded unevenly into gray, and his face carried deep lines, not just from time, but from repetition. The same fights, the same losses. His eyes were the only thing that remained sharp, not hopeful, not optimistic, but unwilling to look away. "You're either telling me something real," he said, his voice dry, worn from use, "or you're wasting both of our time." Silas didn't answer that. He placed the documents on the desk, then the recorder, and finally, the list. Hargrove didn't react immediately. He read, slowly, carefully. His fingers moved across the pages not like someone scanning for headlines, but like someone measuring weight. Every name, every number, every recorded detail. He took it in without interruption. Elena stood beside Silas, her posture still, her hands resting lightly against the edge of the desk. She didn't speak. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke. And for once, it spoke clearly. Hargrove reached the end of the file and leaned back in his chair. For a moment he said nothing. Then he looked up. "This is going to hurt people," he said. Silas nodded. "I know." Hargrove studied him for a few seconds longer. "Good," he said quietly. "At least you understand that part." The story broke 3 days later, not all at once, but enough. Enough to reach the right ears, enough to force attention, enough to make silence no longer an option. Investigators arrived, not in force, but in presence. Vehicles that didn't belong to the town appeared at the edge of the forest. Men and women in neutral clothing moved through spaces that had been untouched for decades, their expressions focused, their questions precise. The valley was sealed. The submarine, what remained of it, was classified again. But this time, not buried. Briar's End changed. Not visibly at first. The same houses, the same roads, the same quiet routines. But beneath it, something shifted. People talked. Not loudly, not publicly, but enough. The kind of conversations that happened behind closed doors, in lowered voices, in the space between trust and fear. Some were angry, some were relieved, some wished it had never been uncovered at all. Not everything was resolved. Some names on the list led to men who were already gone. Others led to companies that no longer existed. And a few simply disappeared into processes that did not move as quickly as truth demanded. One evening, as the investigation began to settle into something slower, something bureaucratic, Hargrove called Silas back to the office. He didn't say why, only that it mattered. When Silas arrived, Rook at his side, Hargrove didn't greet him the same way as before. There was something different in his posture, less guarded, more uncertain. "I've seen cases like this before," Hargrove said, standing near the window, his silhouette framed against the fading light. Silas waited. Hargrove turned, holding a single sheet of paper. "There's a name missing," he said. Silas's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" Hargrove stepped forward, placing the paper on the desk. "It's not in your documents," he said. "Not in the logs. Not in the records." He tapped the page once. "But it should be." Silas looked down. A blank space, a position, a role, unaccounted for. Rook shifted slightly beside him, not reacting to the paper, but to the room, to something unseen, something unresolved. Silas looked back at Hargrove. Then someone made sure it wasn't there. Hargrove nodded once. "Exactly." The moment passed, but it didn't disappear. Gideon Bale did not vanish. He did not run. He did not deny anything. He simply stepped back. His name surfaced, his connections traced, his influence reduced, but not erased. Men like Gideon didn't collapse. They adapted. And in the quiet corners where attention faded, they waited. Elena stood at the edge of the valley again a week later. This time it was different. There were markers now, boundaries, signs that declared the area restricted. But the forest still surrounded it the same way, still held it, still remembered. She stood there for a long time, her hands resting at her sides, her posture no longer tense, but not at ease either. Silas stood a few feet behind her, not close, not distant, just present. "He didn't leave," she said quietly. It wasn't a question anymore. Silas shook his head once. "No." She exhaled slowly. "For 20 years, she continued, I thought he chose not to come back." Her voice didn't break, but it softened. And all that time, he was trying to stop something that would have hurt people he didn't even know. Silas didn't respond immediately, because some truths didn't need confirmation. They needed acceptance. Martha stood beside them, quieter than before. Not lighter, but different. The weight she carried had not disappeared, but it had shifted. She looked at Elena, her expression fragile but steady. "I thought I was protecting you," she said softly. Elena turned to her. "I know," she replied. That was all. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. And sometimes, that was where healing began. The investigation continued, but slower now, more controlled. Some things moved forward, others stalled. That was the nature of systems built to manage truth, not reveal it. Silas packed his gear at dawn 2 days later. Not hurried, not delayed. Just ready, the same way he always had been, the same way he always would be. Rook stood nearby, watching. Not the forest, not the valley. Silas. "You staying?" Elena asked. She already knew the answer. Silas adjusted the strap of his pack. "No." She nodded. Didn't argue, didn't ask him to. Some people weren't meant to stay. They were meant to pass through, to shift things, and then move on. He walked to the edge of the forest without looking back. Not at the town, not at the people, not at what had changed. Rook stopped. Just once. at the line where trees began to close in again. He turned, looked back toward the valley. There was no tension in his body, no warning, no signal, just stillness. The same stillness from the beginning, but not the same meaning. Silas watched him for a moment, then followed his gaze. The valley lay quiet, sealed, contained, documented, but not finished. Silas exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "I see it too." Rook turned back, and together they walked into the forest. Sometimes the world doesn't change with noise or power, but with quiet moments that feel almost like a miracle. A dog that stops when it shouldn't. A path that appears when there was none. A truth that rises even after years of being buried. Some may call it coincidence, but others might recognize it as something more. A gentle hand guiding what is right back into the light. Maybe that's how God works in our lives too. Not always in grand, undeniable ways, but through small, steady moments that lead us exactly where we are meant to be, through people who arrive at the right time, through instincts we cannot explain, through courage we didn't know we had. In our everyday lives, we all carry things that are hidden, truths, pain, memories, choices we wish we could change. But this story reminds us that no matter how deep something is buried, it is never truly lost. With faith, with patience, and with the strength to do what is right, even when it's difficult, light will always find its way back. If this story touched you in any way, take a moment to share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope still exists. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what part of the story stayed with you the most. And if you believe in stories like this, stories of loyalty, truth, and quiet miracles, please subscribe to the channel to continue this journey together. May God watch over you, guide your path, and protect you and your loved ones wherever you are.